Majority Report with Sam Cedar.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Cedar.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Cedar.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
June 2nd, 16th. It is Tuesday, June 16th, 2020. My name is Sam Cedar. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. Steps and steps, I guess I should have said. On the program today, Barbara Freese, author of Industrial Strength Denial, 8 Stories of Corporations Defending the Indefensible, from the Slave Trade to Climate Change. Meanwhile, Donald Trump edging down, tiptoeing down in polls, particularly in key states. The Judiciary Committee to hear from DOJ whistleblowers on Bill Barr's stone sentencing interference and auto industry intimidation. Meanwhile, English researchers may have found a cheap anti-inflammatory which can reduce death of seriously ill COVID patients. Rate of death, I guess I should say. Congrats to all of us. The federal government lifts its 20-year moratorium on executions. They're bringing them back. Meanwhile, the Fed is going to backstop crappy corporate loans. But for the rest of us, nada. New Yorkers, get your absentee ballot requests in now, as in today, as in right now. Meanwhile, Elliot Engel, fighting off Jamal Bowman, is now taking GOP super PAC-backed money. In Albuquerque, one man shot at a statue protest as the mayor announces the creation of a community safety department. R.I.P. Ilhan Omar's father dies of COVID-19. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us. We are here one more day. We are still in semi-lockdown, I guess, depending on what part of the country you're in. Some people are more cautious than others. Certainly, we're still seeing surges across almost a dozen states now. In the country. We're waiting on other states. Not going to go away, folks. However, the most likely scenario in terms of, well, there's a couple of scenarios. One is that in some places, people are going to have to go back into some type of lockdown because the curve will be going in the wrong direction, and they will be taxing, if not breaking, their health system in any given state. The other scenario is that people go out, they maintain some measure of responsibility, wearing masks in public, wearing masks, avoiding being inside with other people. I mean, to the extent that we can do that, I mean, that'll work for 5 or 6 months in the northern parts of the country. But after that, we'll see. But the most likely, and then, of course, people are waiting on herd immunity or vaccinations, that's going to take a long time. Vaccinations may never come. We just don't know. However, what people have been really talking about is as a most likely scenario, the easiest and most achievable scenario is certainly maintaining responsibility with things like masks, things like social distancing, but also to come up with a treatment regimen so that the implications of getting COVID-19, assuming, and I've seen all sorts of estimates on how many people are actually susceptible to getting symptoms of COVID-19, but assuming you're one of those, I think the majority of people, there is some good news coming out of it. Now, this is a non-peer-reviewed study, but it is a study that has been taking place from the beginning in terms of providing treatment, not the beginning of, but in the course of treating people. It's not looking back on it. It is a conscious study that was being done in Britain. Dexamethasone, a cheap corticosteroid, which I guess has been around for about 60 years. It's an anti-inflammatory. Greatly reduced rates for people on respiratory support, 35% for ventilator, 20% for those who are in oxygen tanks. This is a randomized trial. So it's an actual study, hasn't been peer reviewed, but it is the first drug to improve survival. Remdesivir, if maybe I'm mispronouncing that, supposedly will speed up recovery. But for folks who are seriously ill with COVID, this anti-inflammatory seems to help. And so it's not something that people anticipate. I mean, look, inevitably people are going to hoard these things, but it's stupid because it doesn't help you unless you've already gotten it and it's already and it is impacting you severely. Anecdotally, a friend of mine who is on immunosuppressants told me that recently their doctor told them that the immunosuppressants, while it makes them more susceptible to catching COVID-19, it can save their lives because one of the sort of bizarre things, I guess, about this coronavirus is that it creates Brendan, help me out here, a cytokine storm?
Yes.
A cytokine storm, which is essentially your immune system begins attacking so violently the virus that it ends up hurting hurting the host, essentially. So the suppression of the immune system actually keeps your body from attacking you too much. So that's good news. We're going to obviously need to see it peer reviewed and more, but there's a lot of people who seem to be very excited about this, basically because it's coming out of a reputable situation and it was a randomized trial, et cetera, et cetera. So nice to bring some good news. That's 2 good stories in 2 days. We'll talk more about the Supreme Court ruling later in the program. Folks, I think people out there know their relationship to their pets, particularly in this situation, how deep it can be. I'm going through this with my cat as diabetes, and it's I'm more emotional about it than I thought I would be, just because he's slow and his brother is upset and et cetera, et cetera. But folks feel this way, cats, particularly dogs. I'm more of a dog person, but that wasn't my choice. We can't always control these things. Well, Embark's breed and health test is the best way to take care of your dog. Is the best way to get a sense of who your dog is. It gives you a full read on breed traits to genetic risk factors. Of course, those genetic risk factors can give you a heads up on what kind of health conditions your dog may have now or in the future. Embark provides the resources to help you and your vet best tailor things like diet and health regimens. Over 50% of dogs apparently are at risk or either a carrier for genetic disease. Embark, of course, will help you learn their health history and, in some respects, their health future. It's developed by PhDs and vets. It's the number one trusted source for breed detection and accuracy. I don't have a dog, like I say, but Kelly, former producer Kelly, dog Edie, she used to talk about a lot. Well, she got Embark for Edie. And she said, I received Edie's results from Embark, and there's so much information about her. She tested clear for all 175 genetic health conditions they screened for. She's not a carrier or at risk for any of the genetic diseases they test. There's also a full clinical trait report. So much great news, but more importantly, I can provide the report to her vet, which will provide so much information to help with Edie's health as she grows up. We've heard from listeners. I've seen people IM super excited about Embark, both of them, what they learned about their dog and the fact that they are sure that they're providing the best diet and the best care for their dog because they want their dogs to be around for as long as possible. This summer, Embark has a limited time offer just for our listeners. You can go to embarkvet.com now. Use promo code majority. You get $50 off your dog, breed, and health kit. Visit embarkvet.com. Use the promo code majority to get $50 off today. Check it out, folks. You'll be glad you did, for you and your vet. All right, let's before we get to Barbara Freese, our guest, let's just hear Donald Trump respond to in many respects. I mean, I don't know if it was total. It was a surprise. Ian Millhiser had sort of predicted and read the tea leaves in some of what Gorsuch apparently had asked during the moot hearings. I mean, not the moot, the oral hearings on this case. But as you know, the Supreme Court ruled that Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, in terms of employers cannot discriminate for race, religion, or sex, was found to also protect folks who are LGBT from discrimination at the workplace. And the argument essentially was, and I'll go into this a little bit later, we may have a guest on tomorrow to go through it a little more, is that Gorsuch is a what they call a textualist, says you can't discriminate based upon sex. And his argument is, if you would allow a woman, if you cannot discriminate against a woman because she's dating a man, then you cannot discriminate against a man because he is dating a man. I mean, to put it very simply, because that is contingent upon the employee's sex. And you're not allowed to discriminate on that basis. That's the long and short of it. Here's Donald Trump responding to this. Now, remember, he is, this is painful for him because there's a lot of evangelicals out there who still want to be able to discriminate against gay people in the workplace. They may get their wish in the context of religious setting, but in terms of a secular workplace, no, sir. Here's Donald Trump.
Let's start with counsel.
Go ahead, please.
Jimmy, reaction to the Supreme Court decisions earlier today about LGBT discrimination, saying that is protected under the Civil Rights Act?
No, they've ruled. I've read the decision, and some people were surprised, but they've ruled, and we live with their decision. That's what it's all about. We live with the decision of the Supreme Court. Very powerful decision, actually. But they have so ruled.
They have so ruled. Very powerful decision. I really wonder if he knows what it is. Do you guys think he understands what's going on with it, or is he just knows like this is going to be bad for the Bible people?
Given more prompts like, can you characterize it for us, not like what to think about it and what adjective you'd like to apply to it.
Mm-hmm.
That is so annoying. Reporters never ask him anything that is specific. Like, you would think at this point that they would have figured out how to ask a question that just sort of like forces him to respond with something as opposed to like good, bad, big, heard a lot about it. Like something to the effect of like, what changes do you think this is going to bring about? Could be many changes, could be big changes, I suppose he could respond. But at least it makes him look more ridiculous in that respect. But there it is. There's your good news. Hang on to that piece of good news, folks, because we're going to get more rulings over the next week or two. And I suspect they're not going to be nearly as good. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, Barbara Freese, author of Industrial Strength Denial, 8 Stories of Corporations Defending the Indefensible, From the Slave Trade to Climate Change. We'll be right back after this.
Sam, I can unmute. Can you unmute yourself?
Sure. Sorry. Am I there? Can you hear me now?
Yep. There.
Okay. Welcome back, Sam Seder, Majority Report on the phone. Pleasure to welcome to the program environmental attorney Barbara Freese. She is the author of Industrial Strength Denial, 8 Stories of Corporations Defending the Indefensible, from the Slave Trade to Climate Change. Barbara, welcome to the program.
Hi, thanks for having me.
All right. So I want to just start with, I guess, what was sort of the beginning of your road of this journey that you have taken through writing your first book about coal, but into the machinations that allowed coal executives, and then ultimately you looked into 7 other industries to do what they do. I think folks who are longtime listeners know that I go twice a year to a mass tort conference where I interview all sorts of tort attorneys. And I ask them the question that I think you have answered, at least to the extent that one can in your book, which is like, how do these people justify making these decisions? After you hear that, what emails were found in discovery or whatnot. But first, tell us about that cross-examination that you had of coal industry executives back, I guess it was in the late 90s. You were working for, I think it was the state of Minnesota, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
And just give us the context of that, because, and also even the change in legislation, the statutory change that changed how you calculated, what coal was, whether, what the standards for the use of coal were.
Right, sure. So yeah, I was an assistant attorney general for the state of Minnesota, which meant that I was basically a line attorney working for the state and representing our pollution control agency. Minnesota had passed a law that that required our public utility regulators to try to calculate in dollars the cost to the environment of generating electricity. So this was really just intended to be some information that would help with energy planning, because of course, public utility regulators play a big role in deciding whether utilities should be investing money in coal plants or other forms of electricity. So this was an early attempt to try to get at that issue and to do it in a science-based way. And it led to this enormous proceeding in the state of Minnesota. This was actually 1995, I think, when we had the hearings. And all the utilities in the state were parties, and we looked at all of the different pollutants coming from coal plants, including CO2 and climate change. And this was still relatively early for states to be getting involved in that issue from a policy perspective. And it really did freak out the coal industry. And they sent many witnesses to testify. And these were scientists, actually, the ones that I cross-examined, not executives, although the executives were obviously supporting their testimony. And they came to essentially tell us in Minnesota that even though the world had already entered into a global treaty to try to fight climate change, and that there was already enormous evidence that this was a genuine threat, they basically came to tell us that we really did not need to worry about it, that it wasn't going to happen, or if it did happen, it would be mild and we'd enjoy it because we're a cold state. And that all those other scientists who were, on whose work the world was mobilizing at that point, that they were basically biased, and we should discount their views. And so that was pretty shocking. And it led me to, among other things, write my first book, Coal, A Human History, which was sparked in part by that. And then over the years, I did additional work trying to prevent the construction of new coal plants, trying to get in place climate laws, worked for the Union of Concerned Scientists, and in the context of this ended up facing a lot more climate denial and saw it sort of spreading through history, or rather spreading through society. But like you, my initial question in the mid-90s kept recurring, which was, how can they be saying these things when there is so much evidence and so much danger? And I started thinking of this as a social phenomenon, which shouldn't be a big surprise to anyone. But once you really start thinking of it that way, rather than what's wrong with this individual, then you start to ask, well, where else has this phenomenon taken society in the past? And how precisely did industries actually justify what they were doing and when confronted with this really compelling evidence? And how did societies overcome that if they did? And so that was what prompted me to start really digging through the archives.
Okay, so now there's a lot of stuff here, and so that I want to go through, but let's and because when we talk about it as a social phenomenon, right, we're talking about it as a social phenomenon within the context of corporations, as a society in and of itself, and then also a social phenomenon in a broader context, and certainly we see that at the very least. We see it with, particularly when it comes to global warming, right? Because that is sort of like the denial, sort of, I don't know if it, I don't know that it escaped the bottle. I think it was, it was sort of like poured on society as part of a tactic in some way. And so I want to just stay for a moment in terms of tactics, because, which is maybe it's, I know that the tobacco industry and the fossil fuel energy, or I should say the fossil fuel industry, has borrowed a lot of tactics that were developed by the tobacco industry. That denial is almost like is being a little bit generous, right? In the context of that, but the denial. Go ahead.
If you take the narrow psychological definition of denial, it's being generous, and I do try to use the term more broadly to include both what we might consider psychological denial and just straight up, from a legal perspective, denying that something exists.
Okay, so let's talk about let's just isolate for a moment, because one of the other industries you looked at was tobacco. Let's just talk about the sort of the similarities. How much of, I mean, I imagine the denial takes place there, maybe, for these industry executives who are smoking cigarettes, as they're sitting in the boardroom, but then they basically try and manufacture a psychological denial for a greater community. What tactics did they use that were sort of like consciously adopted from the oil industry or fossil fuels from the tobacco industry? And has there been any other sort of like instances that you found where tactics sort of consciously were adopted?
Well, certainly one of the tactics that was adopted was the use of front groups. That was something that the tobacco industry did a lot, still does, trying to put their arguments into the mouths of other parties who would sound more credible. And certainly we saw that and continue to see that with the fossil fuel industry. By the way, my climate denial chapter is not just about coal, but about the whole fossil fuel industry and the various groups that they fund. Another enormously important tactic that they use is simply around the burden of proof. If you keep the burden of proof on those alleging danger, then by definition, the benefit of the doubt goes to those on the other side. It goes to the industry. And once you have the benefit of the doubt, you have a profound incentive to always exaggerate the doubt. And that's really easy to do. And when you do that, you essentially create enough confusion that allows you to block any government action. So that dynamic was clearly present with the tobacco companies, still is, and has certainly been used by the fossil fuel industry. Another thing we saw a lot with the tobacco companies was trying to exalt their own motives, so that instead of saying, we're here to sell a product and make a lot of money, they would cast themselves as essentially the defenders of freedom, often casting their opponents as fascists and sort of entering into this tribal mindset where they're the heroes, their opponents are absolutely the enemies. Excuse me, and the system is rigged against them. So that's certainly something we've seen the fossil fuel industry do as well. In the case of fossil fuel, ironically, instead of just saying that they're defending free enterprise, which many of the industries have done, they're arguing that they are defending Americans against the sinister elite, and that gets kind of strange because you end up with billionaires and oil companies funding arguments that are meant to persuade folks on the economically lower side of the scale to distrust those at the top by using this term elite. But of course, they're using it to disparage the mainstream scientists who are spending their lives studying this and really have the expertise.
I mean, this may be outside your portfolio, or maybe not, but I mean, everything you just said, particularly like in that description, I feel like could apply to, 75% of the stories about, what's going on with coronavirus right now. And frankly, what's going on even with stuff like, the supposed free speech that, many on the right feel that they're being denied, like this dynamic of aggrievement and, whatever product they're selling. And just like, I'm just asking questions, right? Like I'm just putting doubt out there. I mean, what's downstream from what in that?
Well, I can tell you with climate change, I mean, it clearly, in terms of climate denial, that clearly began with the industry. And I was there in the 90s when they were really getting this cranked up and sent it out then through these front groups, through right-wing media, then into the Republican Party, and then finally took it over. And that was a really dramatic change. But I mean, you're certainly right that these kinds of dynamics of denial and tribalism appear again and again in lots of different contexts. It's just that in the industrial context, in the corporate context, you have all of these factors that promote denial, plus you have this powerful financial incentive, and you've got this ideology that basically says that the invisible hand will make sure that if you pursue your self-interest, it will automatically lead to the public's interest, and then more recently, in its more extreme forms, that any government interference with the marketplace is inherently evil. So yeah, I mean, what we see in industrial strength denial is a lot of dynamics that seem particularly familiar right now as our nation is engaged in these very, very tribal conflicts over issues that often have a very clear scientific basis to them, or an emerging one in the case of COVID, because of course we're learning things very quickly.
I want to get into sort of like the broad methodologies, if you will, of denial, and how they maybe in the various industries that they manifest themselves in the various industries you looked at. But one thing that occurs to me is that, in terms of climate change, years ago, maybe it was about 10 years ago, I was on a panel with Christine Todd Whitman, who was the former EPA, I think under maybe it was George W. Bush. And
I think so.
And her response at one point, she said, if the left and the liberals, which is what they referred to the left at that time, if the liberals weren't so animated about pushing climate change, maybe folks on the right would be more responsive to it. Like that dynamic I just found fascinating, that there was almost it's the critics' fault that make it so hard for us to sort of lose our denial on some level. And I wonder if that, if that wasn't a dynamic that you came across in the course of looking at these things, that like maybe if people weren't so so overly worried about how much cancer they could get from cigarettes, we would be more willing to look at it, or something like that. I mean, is there anything like that you came across?
I don't think I can actually point to one. I mean, in the great panoply of different kinds of denials, that's kind of a unique one, and certainly not something that I think that the history of any of these campaigns of denial would support. On the contrary, the ability of the industry to remain complacent and deny the harms they're causing seems to be almost endless, and it seems like the only way to get it to be confronted by society is for outsiders to raise the alarm and keep doing it.
I wonder, though, as I say it now, if that isn't just a tribalism, a mechanism in which to enhance tribalism, and then the tribalism itself does the rest of the work. I mean, talk about tribalism in this context, because this is what you identify as a big driver of denial. How does tribalism manifest itself in the context of, like, I don't know, selling unsafe cars?
Well, it manifests itself in every one of these chapters, and that's in part because we have evolved minds that are so immediately divided into us versus them, even when there's really not much at stake. It just automatically happens, and neuroscientific research is showing how immediately it affects the way that we look at the world, in terms of both of deciding what we believe to be factually true, and certainly deciding what we believe to be morally correct. And so, generally speaking, the way tribalism unfolds is that you've got somebody outside an industry who is showing up with some evidence that this industry is causing harm. Now, the people within that industry are very automatically and by human nature going to get defensive, and especially if they're not feeling guilty, and they're probably not feeling guilty about it because they didn't intend to hurt anybody. And they will start immediately being suspicious that they're critics have an ulterior motive beyond just addressing the issue. So they'll start accusing their critics of having that ulterior motive. Maybe they're greedy, maybe they just want attention, maybe they're zealots of some sinister cause. At the same time, they'll start elevating their own role in making the world a wonderful place beyond, just selling the product that they're selling. And before very long, if the public opinion starts changing against them, they will start to complain of a witch hunt, of lynching. They will claim the system is rigged. Once they start feeling that the world isn't fair to them, then that, of course, justifies all kinds of blatantly deceptive things like using front groups and whatnot. So I think that's the general pattern that plays out. In terms of the auto industry, they, of course, were, they were at the top of the world after World War II. They were, some of the biggest companies in the world. They the United States was really redesigning itself around automobiles. But there were so many crashes, so many people dying, and it was a very visible problem. The way they handled it was basically to say that it's to keep the focus not on the cause of the injury, but the cause of the accident. And the cause of the accident, they could almost always claim, was bad drivers, people with bad attitudes, maybe sometimes bad roads. So that was the government's problem. So a big shift there was to get people to start looking at what actually kills folks. Flying through the windshield, for example, or smashing into a dashboard with all kinds of sharp and pointy things on it. And when people from the outside tried to say, like doctors who would show up and say, see how this patient's facial gash accurately reflects this dashboard feature, you should change your dashboards. The auto industry was outraged. They didn't think those people had any business telling them how to design their cars. And of course, that became quite public when Ralph Nader came along and tried to suggest that there were certain ways to redesign their cars. They were just at the very top of the world, and they thought it was audacity for anybody from outside of their tribe to suggest that they were doing something wrong or had a responsibility to protect the drivers who inevitably crashed in millions of crashes, even if they were good drivers or even if they were bad drivers. They still didn't necessarily deserve to fly through their windshield.
Let's talk a little bit about, I want to definitely hit the leaded gasoline and investment products, because these are sort of, like the level of knowledge that I think was involved here, at least in terms of leaded gasoline, as to the dangers of leaded gasoline. It's sort of astonishing in a way. I mean, will you tell us a story of leaded gasoline? Because I have some familiarity with this, where the as far as I remember, the guy who invented it was like, hey, wait a second, this could be a problem. Right? I mean,
oh, well, more than that. Yeah. I mean, basically GM was working on trying to make cars more powerful. And in the 1920s, cars had a problem with knocking. And they wanted to be able to make bigger engines. And so they wanted to solve the knocking problem. And one of their chemists figured out that if you put a little bit of this lead-based chemical, lead tetraethyl, they called it, into the gasoline, the knocking went away. So that was pretty cool, and they were very excited about it. But this was lead, and people had known since antiquity that lead affects the mind. And it was by then already the most conspicuous industrial poison, and people knew that it built up in the body, and people got lead poisoning. So when the news that they were going to do this got out, they got a lot of pushback from public health experts in academia. They got a letter from the Surgeon General saying, in this sort of very polite fashion, since we know this is a poison and it builds up from lots of tiny exposures over time, is this really such a good idea? And basically the scientists for GM wrote back and said, well, we haven't really tested this. We don't really have any evidence, but we don't think it will be detectable. So it's this kind of, if you can't see it, it's going to be fine sort of situation. And this ended up in the newspapers because there was a very spectacular series of poisonings at one of the plants making tetraethyl lead right outside of New York City, a Standard Oil plant, and people suffered there from what was referred to as violent insanity from being exposed to the product put into the gasoline. This is not what comes out of the tailpipe later. But that got a lot of attention to this issue of putting lead in the gasoline. There were big conferences, well, one big conference, frankly, that the Surgeon General held, brought in the industry, brought in the public health authorities, and the industry basically said, first of all, they got up and said, hey, we have no bias on this issue, and if you suggest otherwise, you're insulting us. And we are, that it's actually men of medicine who work for the company who are controlling this issue, and if they see any evidence showing a real harm, we'll take this out immediately. And basically the conference ended up saying, well, okay, we don't really have evidence to shut you down right now, but it's really important that we keep track of this issue, that we watch it over time. Congress should appropriate money to study this over time. Well, the only groups that actually studied this over time was the actual industry making the leaded gasoline. They ended up dominating the research. And of course, they never found a problem. And they ultimately had a theory that was quite dominant, that having a certain amount of lead, a very high amount of lead in your body, was perfectly natural and perfectly harmless until you crossed a line and suddenly you had clinical poisoning. So, this was in the 1920s. And so much was known, so much was predicted. Then the issue was ignored for 40 years until the 1960s, when a scientist actually trying to figure out the age of the Earth, a geochemist, was studying lead levels and realized, yeah, lead is everywhere, but not because it's natural. Lead is everywhere since we put it in our fuel. And before that, it wasn't everywhere, and made it obvious that we had, in fact, created this low-level poisoning of pretty much the whole world, pretty much generations of people, which affected not just the development of all of us, pretty much all of us born before 1980, but in fact continues to have impacts on adults who were exposed to lead in childhood.
I mean, there's a sufficient, I mean, I don't know if it's sufficient, but there is a body of evidence that the reduction in crime that we've seen nationally and internationally is a function of essentially outlawing lead in gas.
Yes, that's a really interesting theory, and there is evidence. I find it very interesting. I've seen one study finding otherwise, and I didn't feel competent to resolve those studies. So I hope we continue to look into this. But we do know that lead not only diminishes IQ, but makes it harder for people, made it harder for kids to function in school, made it more likely that they would end up in trouble with the law, was associated with anger issues. So it really should not be any big surprise if some of that crime wave that has been diminishing since the 90s was in fact related to having poisoned generations of people.
All right, let's talk about the investment products that led to the financial crash in 2008. I mean, I think there's a decent, just today, I guess yesterday, the Fed announced that it was going to back corporate bonds, essentially corporate loans. There is a real concern that there is this sort of animal out there, financial instrument, collateralized loan obligations as opposed to debt obligations. It was the CDOs that, many people say did us in the financial crisis. And that there's a similar sort of securitization of really bad corporate loans that are out there. The Fed's stepping in right now. I don't think that's a coincidence, but give us a sense, because I'm really curious. I mean, one of the things that, let's, in the context of the financial crisis, I mean, I know that there's like sort of an arrogance that a lot of these folks had, and that they just thought, well, I think it ranges from like, I know what I'm doing, you don't. It's too complicated for lay people to understand, to like, I know I'm going to make money and I don't care what happens beyond that. But also, I guess I'm really just curious. I know there's, situations in discovery where you find like people are very aware of the consequences. They know that things could turn horrible and they still sort of justify it to themselves. Talk about that in context of the 2008 crash.
Sure. By the way, I do want to stress that in almost all of my chapters, I'm focusing largely on public denials because I think it has a really important impact on, the social norms around how we understand truth. I think it's corrosive in ways that just hiding a secret in your secret documents isn't. But we do have some documents from the financial crisis that give you an idea of some of the things that were going on behind the scenes in their minds. Certainly, there was denial about the fact that there was a housing bubble, denial about the fact that there were these ridiculously low and dangerous lending standards, denial about the ability to take really risky subprime loans and turn them into investment products that were supposed to be safe. But I think one of the biggest and most important areas of denial associated with the financial industry was simply their denial that they needed to be regulated. This notion that somehow they could manage risk themselves and in the public interest, and that is how we ended up deregulating that industry, taking apart the Depression era regulations, and that is what blocked us from regulating derivatives, even though people knew that they were incredibly complicated and nobody really understood them, and therefore they were dangerous. And then, of course, there was just this really general sense that it is fine to exploit people, that, sort of celebrated greed and argued that people who made ridiculous sums of money really deserved it because they could get it. And so those are all the areas of denial that I discuss in that chapter.
When we talk about public denial, just talk, I guess broadly, what does that do to society? I mean, is part of the sort of real, I guess, degradation of folks' trust in institutions a function of that?
Absolutely, yeah, and in fact, that's one of the arguments that I make. I mean, you can sort of see it if you look at what happened with ozone, and I'll just try to talk about this very quickly. We had a crisis. There were years and years of denial. Eventually, we had an ozone hole. It became obvious what was going on. Chemical industry decided to shift. They could make the substitutes anyway. So we had global scientific assessment groups, scientists brought together under government auspices, working together, and we put together a treaty, and we essentially solved the problem. Ozone is still healing, but it was a big success. But you had immediately after that a backlash against all the institutions that led to that success. You had the rise of this very anti-government libertarian streak, and you had multiple industries, including the tobacco industry and including the climate, the fossil fuel industries, funding organizations that would then challenge the science, go back and challenge the science about ozone, even though that was settled, that would challenge the science, of course, around tobacco, and that would, I think, most consequentially challenge the science around climate. And they would then send these messages out through cable news, right-wing radio, and ultimately, of course, through social media. But the approach of trying to undermine the credibility of government, of academia, of the entire scientific establishment, and certainly of media, left people with nothing left that they could trust to figure out what's true and what isn't when you're talking about science. And that left them extremely vulnerable to people who wanted to appeal to their pre-existing tribal biases or to their resentments, and of course to politicians who are supremely skilled at doing that.
It occurs to me that at one point you have some executives who say, all we need is to put enough science out there to refute it, to just create this cloud of doubt and have people go like, I'm not a scientist, I don't know what to believe, essentially. And
right.
And it sort of feels like in the past, I don't know, 5-10 years, that's what's been going on society-wide. It's not just limited to the question of science, although we're definitely seeing that in the context of COVID, right? I mean, people are just the administration is putting out, to the extent that it's putting out anything, a bunch of different, hydroxy and et cetera, et cetera. But also just more broadly speaking, I've had conversations over the past 5 or 10 years with people who are like, well, you have your facts and I have my facts. And it seems like this has been, it feels like it's sort of emanated from these corporate projects that, go ahead.
I certainly think they contributed to it. I mean, it turns out that societal trust is easier to destroy than I would have guessed. And certainly you see these industries doing this. I mean, back in 1986, I think it was, the Tobacco Institute and the tobacco industry by then was already, the poster child of scientific bias. Nobody took them seriously, and they knew nobody took them seriously. But they ended up issuing a report calling for the investigation of the Surgeon General for censorship of science and said that scientific integrity was at stake. Now, nobody ended up after that thinking, oh, I guess we can trust the Tobacco Institute for scientific integrity, but they didn't need to. All they needed to do was build doubt about the Surgeon General and just sort of distrust building is what I call it in the book. I think that was something they consciously attempted to do and proved to be incredibly successful. And you're right, it doesn't just apply to scientific issues. It applies to our entire sort of post-truth era, and it applied to, weapons of mass destruction and the size of your inauguration crowd and a lot of other things.
Well, it's fascinating stuff. Barbara Freese, the book is Industrial Strength Denial, 8 stories of corporations defending the indefensible from the slave trade to climate change. We'll put a link to it at majority.fm. Thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Sam. I appreciate it.
All right, folks. I'm going to take a break in a moment, head into the fun half of the program. I got a really nice email, and I forgot to pull it about our masks. And somebody wrote in, it was very gratifying. I got to be honest with you, because they said that, I'm going to paraphrase, and people are just going to have to trust me without having the exact verbiage here. Let me see. Wait a second. Maybe I can find it right here. Well, I can't find it, but it was basically like, wore your masks to a somewhere where they were, and it caused other people to remember to put their masks on as they showed up, because our masks, of course, are borrowed. And I should say, I got corrected on this, because I'm old, I keep saying Czechoslovakia as opposed to the Czech Republic. But in the Czech Republic, apparently their slogan was, your mask protects me, my mask protects you. That's what our masks say at the Majority Report merch shop. We've got other stuff there. We got, best of left t-shirts and hoodies and mugs. And we're gonna roll out some other designs soon. But all the masks, all the proceeds go to Pacific Northwest Immigration Services. And so you can check that out. Go to shop.majorityreportradio.com. Also, just a reminder, it is your support that makes this show possible. When you become a member, you support the free show, and then we give you extra content every day. And you get the free show commercial free. So we need some members. We went through a big period of demonetization with on YouTube. That's a source of our revenue. So if you are in a position to support the program, join the majorityreport.com. Much appreciated. If you are not, we're not going to lock anybody out for financial reasons. You can send us an email at majorityreporters@gmail.com. We will take care of it. Also, don't forget justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code majority, get 10% off. And sign up for the AM Quickie. We're going to start putting notifications on the AM Quickie soon. So check that out. Today is Tuesday. Matt, do you know what's going on TMBS tonight?
Yeah, Noam Chomsky's going to stop by, so we'll have an interview with him for every night.
Noam Chomsky, is he going to stop by?
It's not going to be over the internet. He's not traveling to New York.
I hope they're not relying on your internet, buddy, because yours is cutting in and out right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. Send an email to Noam Chomsky, ask him about your internet. Apparently, that's what everybody's doing now. Because there's nothing more that we want is, one of the foremost intellectuals of our day to have to write back email questions on like I've got a bet with my, what's better, I don't know, chocolate or butterscotch pudding or something. I don't know. People are doing that. But check it out tonight at TMBS. See it on YouTube at youtube.com/The Michael Brooks Show or patreon.com/TMBS. And joining us for the fun half today will be Nomi Konst.
Hello.
And what's happening on your show, Nomi?
So even though we are in the same city as the Noam Chomsky, fun fact, we were going to do a live in-person interview in Tucson together, but COVID hit. So that was put off.
Oh.
So Michael just, scooped me sort of like no one's ever interviewed Chomsky before. No. But it's great. He teaches at University of Arizona, a very fine institution. So on this week's show, we have Cori Bush, who is a congressional candidate and activist out of Ferguson. It is a must-see interview. I think she is, if not already, she's becoming one of the leading voices of our generation. She brought me to tears during the interview. She's really gone through quite a bit running for office last time and this time. We have Jennifer Cohn, who talks about, she's an election integrity advocate. She talks about what happened in Georgia about these machines, which is, I think that we all need to talk a little bit more about how the two voting machine companies that we use in America are both owned by Republicans, and several states, including Democratic states, are using them, and they're just faulty and there's no oversight. And that has a lot to do with what happened in Georgia. And then we talked to Lauren Ashcraft, who is running for Congress against Carolyn Maloney in New York's 12th district, which is my district, actually. But she is running against an institution. This is one of the wealthiest districts in the country with, I think, the second highest income inequality in the country. So you definitely want to hear that because the primary is coming up on June 23rd.
That's right. Just a reminder, if you're in New York, you can go online right now. You got to Google wherever county you're in or New York City. You can get an online application for an absentee ballot. All you need to do is put in temporary illness. I think actually on the online version, it has parens. You can use this for COVID. Temporary illness. They will send you a ballot, but you have to do this today.
Today, yes.
And we got very important races, primaries all across the state. Ashcraft's primary, Bowman's primary. We're going to talk about Elliot Engel and AOC's primary. Oh, we should also say, incidentally, on Friday, we're going to be hosting AOC on this program.
What?
Yes, that's right.
Breaking news.
That is breaking news.
Wait, can I be on Friday?
Here we go.
Get out.
Well, I should have done it over the thing, but so that's a little bonus for you folks who listen to the end of the free show on Friday. I'm very excited about it. We'll talk more about that in the fun half. Also, folks, check out the Antifada. Jamie had 12 different things that were going on with that show this week. So they should check that out. Theantifada.com, patreon.com/The Antifada. Matt, what's going on the Literary Hangover Twitch stream?
One thing, pirates. It's twitch.tv/literary hangover. We're talking about pirates, John Paul Jones, American privateers, the American Revolution, that sort of thing.
If you have kids out there, here's a good kid joke. What do you know what the pirate, how does this go? Do you know what the pirate movie was rated? R. There you go. That's good for your kids.
Why did I not have the answer for that one? That's what's more embarrassing.
I actually have a joke that Saul wrote.
Oh my God.
Maybe I'll save it for the fun half. I'm not going to give it away for free.
Save it for AOC.
Yeah, we'll see. All right, folks. we will see you in the fun half. Left is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
You know, I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous. You're a little bit upset. You're riled up.
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude. You want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
That's a good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457. 2, 38, 56, 27. 1/2. 5 eighths. 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy.
Dance, dance, dance.
Rand Paul.
I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Andy. You guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
That guy might be a Nazi.
Agree.
No.
Death to America.
You.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way. Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook. Throw our hands up.
Ooh.
Wow.
But Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me,
Hey! Shut up!
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
we are back. Fun half. Nomi, how are things in the newest epicenter?
Well, in the week since I have spoken to you, not only have we become the newest epicenter, but we also had wildfires literally right outside of our window. And for 4 days, including the day that I was taping, we were like right on the edge of being evacuated, like right behind our house was evacuated. My family's other family members live there and they had to evacuate. These fires we had a dry lightning about a week and a half ago, and it hit the Catalina Mountains behind our house, and the fires spread like wildfires. And by the third day, I mean, it was getting so close. The whole mountain looked like it was on fire, like there was a volcano. And somehow these firefighters, it's not contained yet, but it's deep in the canyon, and they think it's going to be out in the next 9 days. So that's been fun. We were sort of on edge for the last week up until maybe.
Oh, that's
yesterday.
great. Yeah. That's great news. And so what's happening with the, so you got wildfires, and have they gotten the COVID under control? Are people changing their behaviors? No.
No. What are you kidding? Of course not.
Isn't it sort of weird now when you go out and, I mean, I feel like this has probably been this way for you throughout, but now there's this sort of added element of it being that much more risky, right? Like, I mean, you came to Arizona with sort of a New York mentality, having come from an epicenter. And so you were far more sensitive to it. But now it's almost like it's a little bit more even tangible or real. And you're going out there with masks and other people are just, they don't give a shit.
Mm-mm. Yeah, I had to rent a car. I had no car for 2 weeks. And so I rented a car and I went into the rental center, and I'll say everybody there had masks. And that actually shocked me more. Like, that stuck with me, was looking around and seeing every single person in the pretty crowded rental car enterprise with masks. Every single person working there and otherwise. So, that stood out more than the fact that, I go to the grocery store, there are still people walking around without masks. There's no other reason other than the fact, well, the local news isn't covering it to the extent, it's like it doesn't exist. Throughout the entire time, I was really surprised by how local news just wasn't giving enough coverage to COVID. And then it started to become a little bit more serious, I'd say around April, where they were forced to talk about it a bit more. But, it's about reopening the economy, supporting small businesses. And I just assume that a good chunk of folks who are not wearing masks are getting their news from places that are catered to them, whether through algorithms or, legitimately like going to just watching Fox News and OWN or something.
It's nuts. Well, here, will you pull your microphone just a little bit closer to you? We're getting a little bit low. That's great. And
okay.
So Trump is heading to Tulsa, Oklahoma on Saturday. He moved it from Juneteenth, which would have been Friday, because they didn't realize like how sensitive people would be to the idea that like you're headed to the site of one of the worst massacres of Black people in the country's history. And you're doing so on a day that is a day when we celebrate the end of slavery. Nice work. And they got some pushback, but now they're really adamant about going to Oklahoma. And I want to, after listening to this, I want to get your take on what Brad Parscale is doing. He is the Trump campaign manager, claiming there's like 1 million tickets sold for this or something. It's very strange. But here's Trump. He is responding to the fact that Tulsa, the entire sort of government, ranging from like the chief health person there to others, is basically saying like, we really appreciate it if they cancel the rally. This is an indoor rally in a place that has been otherwise closed. Here's Trump.
Rally on Saturday night. The director of the health department in the county and in the city has encouraged you to postpone that, saying they still think that they've got too big a COVID problem for you to pull off a rally like that. Your thoughts on it?
Well, Oklahoma's done very well. I just spoke to the governor. He's very excited about it. Governor Stitt, who's done a terrific job. Mike, I think you can maybe speak to this. He's done a great job. Oklahoma's at a very low number. They've done really fantastic work. They have a pretty new, magnificent arena, as you probably have heard, and we're getting exact numbers out, but we're either close to or over 1 million people wanting to go. We have a 22,000-seat arena, but I think we're going to also take the convention hall next door, and that's going to hold 40,000, so we'll have 22,000 plus 40,000, which would mean that we'll have over 900,000 people that won't be able to go, but hopefully they'll be watching. But it's an amazing. Nobody's ever heard of numbers like this. I think we're going to have a great time. We're going to talk about our nation. We're going to talk about where we're going, where we've come from. And I can tell you on COVID or coronavirus or whatever you want to call it, plenty of names. Tremendous progress is being made. I spoke with the governor of Texas, where they've done a fantastic job, and he said they have had some outbreaks in prisons. And that's where their numbers went out, and the numbers change a little bit because of the prison population. But he's got it in great shape. Texas, Florida's doing very well. Georgia's doing very well. We have tremendous numbers. We have hot spots, as I said, you might, and we take care of the hot spots. But many of the governors have done a very good job. Some not as good as others. Some very good. But Oklahoma's been a place that I think one of the reasons we chose it is because of how well because it's early. It's very early. And because of what a great job the governor and everybody else has done in Oklahoma. And we expect to have, it's like a record-setting crowd. We've never had an empty seat, and we certainly won't in Oklahoma. Mike?
So there it is. He basically, after basically answering a bunch of questions that weren't asked of him, had told us that Oklahoma's at a very low number. It's actually going up, but it's probably prisons. So who cares about that? So now they're claiming that they have 60,000 people who are going to come and that there's 1 million that have signed up for this. What are they doing? They just farming for emails, I guess.
Wasn't that his thing? Brad whatever his name is?
Yeah.
He's like the digital guy? Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's just farming for emails at this point. And you know that Trump feels uncomfortable with certain questions when he asks for someone else. Like, this is probably a question for Mike. Let's hear Mike. Mike Pence, who is on the coronavirus or COVID or whatever you call it, has many names, task force.
And Oklahoma has really been in the forefront of our efforts to slow the spread, and in a very real sense, they flattened the curve. And today, their hospital capacity is abundant. The number of cases in Oklahoma has declined precipitously, and we feel very confident going forward. With the rally this coming weekend, we're working closely with the governor. We'll have measures in place to be screening people coming in to the facilities, but Oklahoma's really led the way in demonstrating that we can safely reopen. And so as we gather to hear from the president and hear about the stakes in this election, we'll also be celebrating a state that's demonstrated every day that you can put health first and open up and do all those things at the same time.
Mike, you gave me a number of...
Yeah. Hey, Brendan, will you do me a favor? Will you just Google the words Oklahoma COVID cases to see how this has precipitously declined? I don't know. Should we just look over, let's say, the last, 10 days? What do they do? Usually an 8-day trailing thing, right? That's weird.
Yeah, look at that spike.
Now know me. I'm not a math person, and I'm not a person who reads graphs regularly. Mm-hmm. But does that look like a precipitous decline to you? What part is precipitous about that, and what part is a decline?
Well, if you look at that 4 hours between when they counted the last numbers on June 11th and June 12th, it does seem like a precipitous decline, if that's how he defines it.
That's a good point, I guess. If you look at the time slot, is there a time, Brendan, is there a time slot where you could do it like just 45 minutes? Is there a 45-minute option on that?
I think that's a gold member perk, and I don't have that.
So let me ask you this question. You've got a room full of reporters who all presumably have these like mini computers in their hands, known as cell phones, who could literally just search that like that. Oklahoma, and somebody could say, excuse me, you just said that Oklahoma has a precipitous decline, and there is no possible way to look at this chart and see precipitous or decline at all, unless you turned it upside down.
Oh, that's what it was. He was looking at it wrong.
But I mean, where's the like, how much lies are they allowed to spew without even like?
Are we surprised? Well, what I'm really actually frustrated with is it's one thing for reporters not to challenge Trump. I just don't see that kind of pushback against Pence at all when he does press conferences, which really concerns me about the state of journalism. Like that was
they all want the access.
Mm-hmm.
They all want the access.
They're going to have to ride on Owen's, coattails to get it.
Here is Pence on Fox and Friends this morning, I think it is, with Ainsley Earhart. Sean Hannity's beau, I guess. Is that the right way to say that? Beau? What do you call it?
Earhart is
your girlfriend? Yeah. You didn't
Wait,
know that?
what?
Oh yeah.
Is that
oh,
what
yeah.
I missed this in the gossip section?
Yeah, there you go. What? And Mike Pence is on there. Now remember, we just played a clip of Mike Pence, from yesterday, where he flat out lied about Oklahoma flattening the curve, where he said there was a precipitous decline. It was not precipitous, and it's not a decline. It's actually about as big of a spike as they have ever had. Not only are they at record numbers of COVID infections as of June 13th, and then by June 14th it went down, and now on June 15th it went back up. On June 15th, they had a higher number of infections than they had on any other day since, I think, the beginning of this.
Wow.
I mean, yes, their highest number ever was yesterday. Well, no, excuse me. The only day that was higher was 2 days before that.
Wow.
And so here he is on Fox and Friends. I think all the people who are involved in him just coming out and lying about this stuff. But here he is. This is the day after he said there was a precipitous decline. And now, of course, it's not about the COVID. It's about the First Amendment.
Right.
Now, let's talk about the rally on Saturday in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I know the governor there has said he might move the venue because so many people are interested in going. Brad Parscale was saying that more than 1 million people are requesting tickets. Right. So how will you do this? I know you're going to hand out sanitizer and masks and take temperatures, but how do you plan on doing this and pulling it off while mitigating the spikes?
Well, we chose the state of Oklahoma really for two reasons. Number one is because it really is time, Ainsley, for us to begin this campaign. The president wants to be out. He wants to be connecting to our supporters. And as you just indicated, literally over 1 million people have signed up to try and obtain an opportunity to come and attend the rally. We're working with Governor Stitt. I talked to him again last night about the venue. We're going to make sure that people have hand sanitizers, that we do temperature screenings, and also make masks available to people that are attending the event. But look, the freedom of speech, the right to peaceably assemble is enshrined in the First Amendment of the Constitution, and the president and I are very confident that we're going to be able to restart these rallies, tell the story of what this president has done through these unprecedented times, but also over the last 3.5 years, and drive toward a great victory on November the 3rd.
So first off, Nomi, do you want to, we should maybe get a pool going of what percentage. I think we did. Didn't we have a percentage? We did. You want to join this pool? The other day we said, right, guys, didn't we do a pool on what percentage? I think I took 10% or 15%.
You took 10. I took 15. Matt took 20.
Okay. Will you write this down, Brendan? I'm serious, because we're all kicking in. Well, I'll decide how much money we're kicking in after we see the results. But 10%, I say, will be wearing masks. Brendan says 15. Okay. Matt says 20. I think Jamie says like 25%. Where are you at? What do you want? Well, you want a piece of this action?
I do want a piece of the action. I thought it was going to be a little bit more morbid, so I didn't know if I wanted a piece of the action, but it's just about the masks. Okay. How can we tell? Are they going to pan out?
We're going to look at images, and we're going to have to just, there'll be an honor system. Like maybe if it's like 10 or 15%, Brendan and I will get in a fight. But if it's, can
there be like a public vote, like a runoff sort of thing?
We could do that too. I'm not sure how we're going to determine, but don't get caught up in that.
Well, the reason is, if you're looking at a photo, there's a, 10 to 12%. It's a small little. I would say 12%.
12%. 12%. That's going to make it really hard.
Wait, actually, no. I'm going to lie because I'm in Arizona. What am I talking about? I would say 6%.
All right, let's just call it 5%.
Workers,
let's call it 5%. 5% increments. All right. I think it's a good bet too. I don't think anybody's going to be wearing masks. I think it could be 0%.
Yep.
There's going to be a couple old people who are going to be wearing masks, and they're not going to realize, like, it doesn't matter the mask you're wearing. If everybody else in there is not wearing a mask, unless you're wearing an N95 mask, it's not going to, I mean, it'll help you a little bit maybe, but it's not going to help you that much. And the idea that this is a First Amendment issue is just patently absurd.
Well, it's interesting because I've noticed, I don't know if this goes hand in hand, but they're trying to reframe Antifa as anti-First Amendment. Have you seen this going around? And I think Trump wrote it on Twitter or something, and that's how it sort of got picked up. So I don't know if this is part of a bigger messaging thing or if they're just throwing whatever out there at this point, but making, the left out to be anti-First Amendment.
Oh, well, that's what's been going on since the beginning with this thing, is that they've been pushing that. Absolutely. It's just funny to hear now the government,
right? Literally
the administration saying this.
Like, who's cutting your First Amendment? The people selling spaghetti outside of
every private venue has to be open for everybody at any time they want to come. That is what is enshrined in the Constitution.
Yeah.
And so if it's booked or it's closed, First Amendment violation, apparently. Here is, this is Larry Kudlow again coming out. They really sent him out. They're really getting him out there now because he is he is one of the president's top economic advisors, and he's run the numbers. And basically, here's the deal: got to get used to it. You just got to get used to it. There's going to be some people are going to be dying, and we just got to get used to it. Here it is, number 5.
I think it's something we have to get used to. I think it's controllable. I think we have better equipment. We have much more experience in handling these hot spots, small metropolitan areas. We are not intending to close down the economy. We do not believe this is a second wave. Having said all that, let me remind one of my favorite health experts said we've got to have best practices with hygiene. All right? In those localities where the guidelines are clearly wear masks, keep the social distancing and so forth. Yep. Those things must be observed. So we must open the economy, but we must do it in a safe way.
But Larry, all the facts you lay on the table are important, but the facts that Sandra put on there about some spikes in some states are important as well. How can you say again, as you did a moment ago, we're not shutting the economy down again? Nobody's wishing for this, but God forbid the health experts go to the president and say, look, we're fearful this is going the wrong way and there could be tens of thousands of more people dying. You're saying the president still will not shut down the economy?
The president is absolutely disinclined to shut down the economy, as is the vice president. I think shutting down the economy could be worse for our health than not shutting it down. Look, I will just tell you what the health experts are saying, Ed, and they do not see the degree of alarm. Now, look, there is hardship. Every human being's value is terribly important. But when you look at the overall numbers, and including these specific areas, this is not necessarily a nationwide event. As I said, case rates and fatality rates nationwide are still rock bottom and have flattened. We're on it. We're watching it very carefully. But that does not mean, because a few places have had flare-ups for one reason or another, that we need to shut down the economy.
Look at that map.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly.
Gee, I wonder why. Oh my God. And then next to it's just so funny because you look at the screen and you see that the Dow is red and it's like ticking down. That's why. I mean, that should just be the full picture and you should just listen to Kudlow's voice over the Dow.
The problem too is that they cannot now sort of put this genie back in the bottle. There is no way to impart to their followers some notion that you got to be careful. Right? I mean, obviously, we need to open up to some extent. But there are some things like massive indoor rallies that are completely lacking in urgency. Certainly, you could have it outdoors. Certainly, it doesn't need to be, you don't need to have a campaign event. But it's also not just that. It's also that, like, you could say not just that we're handing out masks, but you must wear the masks. You must wear the mask, but they won't do that. And it has become this sort of like part of the tribalism and the culture of the right in this country, that you're a cuck if you're wearing a mask. We'll give you the opportunity to be a cuck if you want to, but you'll be a cuck. And there's just that attitude. It's why you're seeing it spike in all those red states. I mean,
because that's also free speech. Your freedom to not wear a mask.
Exactly.
It's oppressive. Like clothing. So oppressive.
It's the right to free virality.
Also, this idea that we're more prepared now in the 3-month, break that we've taken, like there are reports coming out now that all the FEMA gear sent to nursing homes is unusable. And these photos are just like terrible.
Ridiculous.
It's like ripped tarps without like any hands, like space for your hands.
No, I mean, frankly, the only thing that we have bought is that there are in places like England, studies showing that there may be some therapies for the really ill that might mitigate the number of deaths. That's no small shakes, but we're still going to have people get really sick, and we're going to have it be more expansive than it needs to be because you've just got this attitude. Let's go to the phones. Calling from a 760 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
This is me.
Yeah. Who's me? Who are you? 760. Hello. Goodbye. I guess they got a little bit nervous. Calling from an 850 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, this is Ida in Boniface.
It's who and where?
It's Ida in Boniface, Florida.
Ida in Florida. What's on your mind, Ida?
Yes. I'm in a very rural part of the state and surrounded by red. But there's some blue dots and I'm trying to connect them. And are there any resources out there to help people who have zero experience doing this sort of thing?
You mean you're trying to find other folks on the left to maybe organize and talk about stuff?
Right.
I would search around for a DSA chapter. That's possible. I would search around for the Democratic Party. Just Google it in your county. Maybe I would say probably by your county. And I mean, you could go into our chat on YouTube. You could go into Reddit and, ask around. What part of Florida are you in again?
It's Holmes County.
Holmes County.
Boniface, so it's northwest Florida. I spoke with the fella. He's a socialist, and he runs the so-called Democratic Party here, but it's basically just him. So that's kind of the problem is I feel like I'm having to start from scratch.
Well, the other thing you could do is set it up yourself. And
yeah, that's exactly. So what resources are there for somebody who doesn't know what they're doing in order to do that?
I think things like Indefensible, don't they have guides and things like that?
Yeah, there is the Indivisible guide. I would Google Indivisible guide. That will help you. But I also think that look, the first thing that you need to do is just connect with other people, right? And so it's really just, it doesn't have to be, there's no special sauce necessarily about it being a political thing. You can start with I want to get a online Facebook page or something like that for, Democrats in Holmes County, and just trade some ideas there, and then maybe get some email lists, email addresses, send people some emails and do some social distancing, meetups type of thing. But I would Google Indivisible guide.
There also might
be. They're holding a summit called the Rural Voices Summit for anybody else who's in this position. And I'm hoping maybe they have a lot more information to help me there on that. It's coming up soon, next week, or maybe it's later this week. I can't remember. It's the 6, I think.
That sounds like a good idea.
People, if they're also in the same situation, should probably just Google that. It's Rural Voices Indivisible Summit.
Oh, good. That sounds like a good idea. Nomi, anything else?
There's an organization called Rural Organizing that's doing extraordinary work specifically around this kind of stuff because, frankly, it's the Democratic Party's failure of just like pulling out of all of America. And I mean, that's pretty much it. So you have a lot of areas that maybe used to have a Democratic presence or, have had their districts shifted and maybe they're becoming more Democratic. But Rural Organizing is doing a lot of great work. You might want to check them out. And honestly, even Our Revolution, I know people love to hate on Our Revolution. They've been getting a lot of weird press lately, but they're very decentralized. And there's like infrastructure in place pretty much all over the country where there have been chapters. Some are much stronger than others, but there might be some sort of chapter that's close. You're in the Panhandle? Is that where you are?
Yes, I actually, through the Bernie campaign as a BBC, had met, there's a lady running a OR chapter to the west of me out of like Milton. But that's a pretty good little distance west. And so I've been talking to her, and maybe I was going to see if she could help coach me on what to do. She's an older lady that's a lot more experienced in organizing and stuff, I think.
Well, Ida, that sounds like a good idea. I would talk to her. And I think, you're on the right path. Just keep plugging away at it. I would check out that Indivisible guide, and I would check out that Rural Organizing, and I would check out that event that Indivisible is doing and talk to that Our Revolution person, and I think you're going to have, you'll be right there. In all these endeavors, you're never going to enter into it with, 100% confidence that you know what you're doing. I mean, I certainly have never done anything that I've started with that sense of confidence. And you just got to, push through it. And eventually you'll look back on this time and go like, wow, I knew what I was doing from the beginning. I just didn't realize I knew what I was doing. Or I made a couple of mistakes and I've learned from them. So I wouldn't be intimidated by it. I think it sounds like you're doing all the things that you should be doing.
It's pretty awesome.
To plug, I did start a Facebook page like 2 days ago after a little protest we put over here.
Great.
All of 4 people. But so if there's anybody listening that's in our area, I named it Wiregrass Progressive. And there seems to be one also. The Wiregrass area encompasses basically the southeast of Alabama and the southwest of Georgia and like a little good swath of Florida. So somebody else had started one up in Alabama, but I haven't been able to get up with them yet. But ours has like a little deer standing in the wiregrass, and there's only like 4 of us so far. But if anybody's listening that's in our area, please go join the Facebook page.
Wiregrass. Say it again. Wiregrass Progressives.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Ida. Good luck with it.
All right, thank you.
Keep us updated. Let us know how that goes.
That's
calling from a 202 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Is this me?
It is you.
Oh, that's great. So I wanted to kind of underline.
Who is you?
This is Chris from the DC Metro.
Thank
area.
you, Chris.
Can you hear me?
Yes, from the DC Metro. Yes, go ahead.
So I wanted to kind of emphasize something that y'all been talking about last week and this week regarding the police. And I think it's crazy how a lot of the different police unions seem to feel like they're under attack, which I find very interesting considering within the past, the combined numbers from last year and this year so far, and every death is tragic. I don't want to minimize this, but let's put this in perspective. 247 law enforcement professionals have died. That's compared to 1,024 killings of civilians from police within the past year. So it's bizarre that, a couple officers drink some milkshakes a little too fast and all of a sudden NYPD's under attack. They're on the brink.
Here's the thing. Okay, listen. Now, it's dangerous to be a police officer. Don't want to minimize in any way the deaths. People are signing up, and there's sure plenty of officers who go into this for all the right reasons. Some of those, they have families. They don't show up at home because they're doing their jobs. But really, I think, more than the dangers that are on the job, which they know about, right? I mean, this is when you sign up to be a police officer, you know that you're going to be in a dangerous situation. And which is not to say you don't want to minimize that for them in any way you can, short of maximizing the danger for other people, right? I mean, presumably the concept of policing is that they're going to save more lives. That, I mean, one would expect that police who are involved in a dangerous job are going to have, some number of deaths. Not something you want at all. The proper number should be 0. But what we're seeing, with the police, however, is less about complaints about their physical dangers, and I think more about this sort of sense that, we saw it with that PBA guy the other day. We want to be respected. We don't want to be villainized. Blah blah blah. I'm sorry. That's not a societal problem right now. That is the idea that you have bad branding is not something that I think is at the top of the list of stuff that we need to deal with as society. And I think to a certain extent we get stuff like this. Put up this do you have an image of where the Detectives Endowment, the DEA, the NYPD Detectives Endowment Agency.
Oh yeah, I'll pull this up.
Well, they freaked out. Apparently, 3 cops went to Shake Shack. I don't know which one it was. Maybe it was one on Flatbush. I don't know.
Broadway in
200 Broadway in Manhattan.
Downtown.
Oh, it was the one on Broadway. Okay.
Or no, downtown by
the one downtown. All right. They didn't go to the original one, and they all got milkshakes. And here it is. Urgent safety message, June 15th. Tonight, 3 of our brothers in blue were intentionally poisoned by 1 or more workers at the Shake Shack in 200 Broadway in Manhattan. After tasting the milkshakes they purchased, they became ill, making it necessary for them to go to an area hospital. Fortunately, our fellow officers are not seriously harmed.
What? And
it goes on. And the big problem is that the press just oh, okay. If the presidents of the Detective Endowment Association said that 3 officers had been poisoned at Shake Shack by bleach in their milkshakes, then it must be true. So we're just going to dutifully report it. And this morning they had to retract it all. Here it is.
Yep.
After a thorough investigation by NYPD's Manhattan South investigators, has been determined that there was no criminality by Shake Shack's employees. Now, that is not really the whole story, is it? What happened then? They're being a little bit shy. Maybe what it was is maybe they just got sick. Right. Maybe there was some bad milk in there. Right. Or maybe they made up the whole thing. Right. And so think about within that 24 hours at a time where police are getting a lot of scrutiny, right? And a lot of people are they're scrutinizing the police officers, how far they were able to travel with that story, that they had been poisoned by Shake Shack, those villainous Shake Shack employees. So people have to contemplate, if the cops are willing to do that in that context, what do they say when the only person to disprove what they're saying is dead?
Right.
Or what do they say? Oh, my body camera didn't work.
Right.
Or, this is and just in terms of the way that people report it.
And how many years are being served in prison because of things cops said?
Of course. And the fact that this, in this
Appreciate
moment
the call.
Of all moments, the press can't even ask a question about this in this moment. That's what's horrifying, is that this is the moment where everybody's eyes are open and they're still not getting the pushback. I mean, they got it through social media, but they didn't get it through the press. Yeah,
it's pretty nuts. Pretty nuts. Naomi, will you just turn up the volume on your mic a little bit? Just
More?
a little bit more?
I keep sending messages and they're saying it's okay.
Oh, they are? Oh, okay. It's a little bit low for me. All right. Sorry.
How's it now? Is that
oh
better?
My gosh, that's great.
Okay. I know how to adjust.
Matt, does that work for you?
Yeah, that's great.
All right, let's
Thanks.
read a couple of IMs. Portland Progressive. I work in a hospital, and speaking up for people working at hospitals all across the country, nurses, medical assistants, doctors are highly qualified and work their asses off and can handle a bit more than the stitches. These people deserve a great deal of respect for what they do every day. That said, I'm very happy Mindy is on the mend. Okay, yeah, exactly. I agree. I mean, I think there's a lot of hospitals that are underfunded, and they're underfunded either because they're public hospitals, and that's where, states and cities are cutting back, or they're underfunded and understaffed because you've got some hedge fund that's come in and bought the hospital group, and they're looking at where can we squeeze some extra profit?
Yep.
That's the problem with having a private system. Henry Wadsworth Thick Fellow. Are you still doing any acting? I have a part that would be perfect for you as an insurance salesman, more specifically a salesman of CPI&I insurance, catastrophic penile illness and injury insurance. What? The offer is predicated on you having that mustache. Well, I mean, contact my peeps and we'll see what the offer is. DMXMJ. What's your pirate's favorite letter of the alphabet? You may think it's R, but it's actually the C. Pretty good.
Ha ha ha. Why is it taking me a second to laugh?
What did I do? Thick Mulvaney, pirate joke. A child is trick-or-treating as a pirate. At one house, a lady says, "How cute, but where are your buccaneers?" And the kid replies, "Under in my bucking hat, lady."
That's PG-13.
Libertarian Progressive Alliance. Sam, just a reminder, Chomsky is a left libertarian. Matt, you should ask Chomsky tonight if he got my email about whether progressives should formally enter an alliance with libertarians on community policing. IDAB. Sam, I live in rural Northwest Florida. I'm trying to organize people in my area. I have zero experience. That must be, I think we may have talked to her. Josh from Chicago. I was wondering if Sam could bring on Saul as a guest to talk about whether he's part of the call to cancel Paw Patrol after cops and live PD have been canceled. That's a good question. First of all, Saul would not do it. He's very shy. In fact, we were supposed to do a podcast that we were going to call the Grasshopper Report for school. And he had everything ready, and he sat down in his chair, and I said, "You ready?" And he's like, "I don't want to do this. I'll write a book instead." And that's what happened. So calling from what do we got here? 509 area code. I have a feeling this person's got going to weigh in on the Paw Patrol controversial question. 509 caller, Paw Patrol should be taken off the air. 509. 509. Well, looks like somebody maybe they had to go deal with their clients. Calling from a 570 area code. 570.
Hello, Sam. Is this me?
It is you. Who's this?
Hi, my name's Jay. I'm from Pennsylvania. I was just wondering if we could weigh in on the New York 16 race. There was this article that dropped from Ryan Grimm and Kayla Lacey, and also Hillary Clinton decided to make her first endorsement this special, endorsing Engel.
All right, we'll talk about it.
So,
we'll talk about it. Thanks. So let's talk about this, Nomi. New York 16th. This was a race. Elliot Engel has been in office for I don't know how long. He is ossified. He is out of touch with the district.
Yeah.
This is a guy who voted against the Iran deal. And this is important to me because this was one of the most, I think one of the best things that Barack Obama did that has obviously been unwound by the Trump administration, but it was one of the signature things that he did in foreign policy in particular.
With Schumer's pushback. I mean, we have to keep
with
that in
Schumer's
mind.
pushback.
Democrats, leadership,
Yes.
pushing back.
Yep. And Engel voted against it. Engel also got in trouble because he was claiming that he was quarantining in the district, but in fact he was in Maryland. He lied about that. He also was caught on live hot mic when he was trying to get on stage at a George Floyd protest, and it was Ruben
Diaz Jr., the Bronx Borough president, not senior.
Diaz Jr.
Big
right.
difference, personality-wise.
And he said, please get me on, and Diaz is like, I don't know if I can do it, and he's like, I wouldn't care except for it's the primary, and he said it twice. And now it's found out that he is getting money from essentially a front PAC.
Yeah.
That a Republican super PAC gave money to a sort of, I guess, just a generic PAC that is not necessarily partisan aligned, and gave Engel the money because there's all these endorsements for Jamal Bowman, who, folks can go Google Majority Report Jamal Bowman. We've released that, and I think Ring of Fire, maybe. We've put it on both shows. He's a great candidate. Mm-hmm. And there was some other good progressive candidates in it. They dropped out so that he has a chance to win because he got all these endorsements from a lot of organizations. He's got Bernie Sanders endorsed him. AOC endorsed him. Elizabeth Warren has now endorsed him. And Hillary Clinton makes her first endorsement.
Unreal. Unbelievable. This is just...
And it's for Eliot Engel.
But this is more about New York than it is about national, I think.
Of course, right?
Their relationship she had in New York. Listen, I mean, this is an interesting... there's a lot of money being poured into this race on both sides. It's like the John Ossoff race for progressives, if you were to think about it as a primary. Granted, it's nowhere near the money that the Republicans were throwing against the Democrats, and the Democrats were throwing against the Republicans with John Ossoff's congressional. But on a progressive level, I actually have never seen, maybe with exception of Jessica Cisneros, it seems like this is the new model. JD comes in, picks a candidate, gets invested very early, puts their staff on board, brings in the other endorsements. And in a state like New York, the Democratic Party is the Republican Party. I mean, that's basically where everybody runs as a Democrat, but the Republican Party has very little muscle, especially downstate. And, Working Families Party sort of serves as like the Democratic Party. If I always say shift over a little bit to the left, and that's the definitions. And so you see this coalition being built around Jamal Bowman and the other candidates, getting out of the race, knowing very well that the polling, could have been divided and Engel could have sat in. But I think the real strength here in this race, why it's so appealing, is that it's not just that Engel's a bad Democrat. There's a lot of bad Democrats. Melanie DeRigo in Long Island arguably is running, it's pretty bad to say it, you have to be really bad. Tom Suozzi's probably even worse than Eliot Engel because he literally caucuses with Republicans. But she's not getting that. And part of it is because Engel's just asleep at the wheel. And there's a power in that. If you're not in your district, if you're not dealing with your community and your community's frustrated with you and, you're out of touch, like when you're interviewed, there's a real opportunity to swoop in and get a strong candidate, especially because that district is becoming more diverse. I think there's some real potential here. I think he's going to win. I think Bowman's going to win. Even with mail-in very confusing, I think ultimately Bowman will win because there's just, I think something like $700,000 was thrown into his race in the last few weeks from different organizations.
Well, he raised after that story came out, saying that Engel got $100,000 from that, ultimately from that GOP super PAC. He raised about $100,000, I think, in 24 hours.
Yeah.
Now, all right, so I want to talk about this. What are the implications of, it's a safe Democratic seat. Mm-hmm. There is no doubt that Jamal Bowman is to the left of Eliot Engel. And there's going to be the pushback if he wins. People are going to be celebrating. The pushback is going to be like, These guys, just Democrats, the left can't win in anything but a safe seat. First off, put aside that question, because that question changes immediately frames the value of this in terms of that, as opposed to the value of having safe blue seats be genuine progressives.
Right.
And I mean, you can look to AOC seat and see the potential anyways,
That's
upside
right.
of this, but it's also like we're building a progressive caucus within the Democratic Party in Congress. And where else would it start? Would you lay the building blocks for this than a state like New York or a state like California?
Yeah. No, I think that's it. Especially in a state like New York, where people identify more as progressive than they do Democrats, and yet most of the politicians, because of the machine has broken apart. The machine in New York has been extremely powerful, but because of shifts in neighborhoods and, I'll say it, gentrification in a lot of ways, you have like these emerging takeovers against machine-appointed elected officials. I mean, that's something really important to keep in mind here, is so many of these elected officials, because of the way the machine functioned with county committees, I don't want to go too into the weeds here, but if someone retired, essentially the person who was retiring, the Congress member, who's retiring, would say, okay, I want this person to take my seat. And based on this like mechanism of pseudo-democracy in the county committee, basically be anointed. There was no election. It was just an internal decision because it's a one-party rule city in New York City. So it's prime opportunity to build a force, especially because all of these elected officials, all of these congressional members, maybe with exception to like Nydia Velasquez, are and including Jerry Nadler, who many people think is progressive. They're all pretty corporate and conservative. So if you can build that bench, suddenly when AOC goes in there with the Green New Deal, or Ilhan Omar talks about, challenging the state of Israel on right-wing, taking over 30% of the West Bank, for instance, or reforming the police, there's a crew of folks who have her back. That doesn't happen right now. Now, alternatively, I still think that progressives can win in conservative districts. Last week we were talking about Nabila Islam's race. She just conceded, but she conceded because the person who had run before had just gotten over 50%, just over 50%. And Nabila is now like less than 100 votes away from being in second place. That is the district, the Republican district. It was the closest district in the country last cycle. And if we hadn't been dealing with COVID, or dare I say it, if there had been a coalition like a Jamal Bowman coalition, I have no doubt Nabila would have won that race. She was just a couple percentages away from making the runoff based on the numbers. So if she had gone up.
Guys, did we lose her?
Yeah, it looks like we
She
lost
appears to be
him.
frozen.
Yeah. I'm going to stop her video.
We're having a tough time with the audio. But the point being, I think that Nomi was making is that, for challengers, much more challenging in the COVID environment, because where you don't have dollars, what you do have are volunteers who are energized and are going to go out and are going to get people out to vote for you. And in many respects, what we're witnessing, I think, and I think Nomi would agree, but I would like her perspective, is that we're still developing, in many respects, a model. And AOC created part of that model. If Jamal Bowman wins, it is the model has taken sort of like a 2.0 quality, and so on and so on. So I don't know. It's encouraging. Again, if you're in New York, get your absentee ballot today and make sure you send it in. All right, let's talk about this since Nomi's not here. I know she'll be very upset about this because of how much she likes Steven Crowder. We have Crowders. We have Vic Berger's Crowder stuff too, right? Brendan?
Yes, we do.
All right, I don't see it on the list, but folks, listen. I don't want to get involved Oh, is Nomi's coming back? All right. So Nomi, well,
Sorry.
basically, I just wrapped it up by saying that, like, the COVID thing prevents Nabila from going out and organizing on the ground. And we haven't quite yet. We're still building the model of something that we're still building the model about, that AOC sort of like showed, and Jamal Bowman is sort of like the next iteration of that model of like how you build some strength and build some national sort of like a power behind you. On some level, Nomi, we're also seeing this in the Senate. The only place we're seeing is in Kentucky.
Oh my God,
with
it's
Charles
amazing.
Booker.
Unbelievable.
And if he wins, that's going to be huge because I'll tell you why I like it if he wins. He's a great candidate. Interviewed him. Fantastic. Really fantastic. B, it is a real opportunity to see if he can, very hard to knock off Mitch McConnell.
Right.
Very, very hard to do it. And if Booker doesn't do it, they're going to say McGrath would have won, blah, blah, blah. But if you can't win the Democrat.
I mean, the other thing is they put up these just blah candidates.
Well, it's not just a question of blah candidates. It's Chuck Schumer going out there and making sure that he gets people, that he's recruiting people who are going to be to his right. Like this is an ongoing theme with the leadership of the Democrats in the House. Like, and I am like, I think I said this last week when you were on too, but I am more and more of the mind that I don't want an avowed, or someone who is a self-proclaimed, sort of the left of the caucus to be the leader.
Right.
I don't think that behooves the left anymore. I think I would rather somebody who's unskilled and a little bit more centrist than a supposed leftist. I'm thinking Pelosi and Schumer both sort of package themselves as sort of the left side of the caucus.
But I mean, I just don't buy it. I don't see it that way. I think maybe that's how it's seen internally, or it was seen 10 years ago, or it's seen through Fox News's lens. No matter who is the leader, it's going to be somebody that Fox News portrays as a progressive. I mean, I'm in Arizona right now where you have Senator Sinema, who is nowhere near what she was when she was state representative, when she was radically progressive, and she is now radically conservative. And I'm watching these commercials, and it's like they're making her out to be, I mean, she's not running right now, but like they're making her out to be this progressive, like sides with radical leftist Kirsten Sinema. And if in an alternate universe in Arizona, that's where she's portrayed. So they're going to portray these people however they want to portray them.
But I'm not even talking about that. I'm talking about what Schumer and Pelosi want in their caucus. They don't want to be pulled left. And so they're going out and recruiting people on the right. And they're saying we're recruiting people on the right because they can't win in that district unless they are in the right or that state. But I think it has to do with they're trying to fashion the victory in a way that takes the pressure off of them as individuals.
Right.
And I think that the way, so what happens is progressives end up getting screwed on legislation.
Right.
Because that is their operating principle. What did happen with Kirsten Sinema? Like, do you have a sense of like?
She ran for Congress in a district that was actually pretty Democratic. I mean, the other two people that were running in that race were there were three progressive people running in that district in Phoenix. And I just think that she wanted to run for Senate, and she just started shifting more and more conservative. And this is something that we as a movement need to be savvy to. I know you know this, but like young leaders, especially of my age and a little bit older, AIPAC would come around. And this is back when like AIPAC was pretty Democratic. I mean, I don't mean Democratic. I mean like it was
associated with the
Democratic Party like 2 years ago, right? Openly associated. And they would go and I mean, they approached me and I said, no, obviously, but they would go to young people and say, do you want to come on this trip? Do you want to come to Israel? Do you want to, you're a rising leader? And then that's how they get you. And there's all these different industry groups that do that. And I think that's how they get you more and more conservative. They essentially say, we're going to help you with your career, rise up. We'll have your back in your next race. And it's just as transactional as that. You cannot, I mean, it's not conspiratorial. It's just how it works.
If I run for office, I want somebody to come take me to the Bahamas. That's what I want. And then I'm going to get very, very conservative about the Bahamas or whatever. I would
well, there's some tax incentives there.
Go to Bahamas or go anywhere like where there's a water park. That's what I want. I want to go to a water park.
Can I just? I'm sorry, real quick. Can I just? My thing froze when I just wanted to wrap up on two things that I think are really important. Moving forward in these races, I think these coalitions, these leftist coalitions, solidarity coalitions, are extremely important. That's what makes Jamal Bowman's race the national race everybody's paying attention to. It's not because everybody knew who Elliot Engel was, and frankly, it's not even because Elliot Engel is the worst Democrat. He's not. He's bad, but he's actually not the worst, which is crazy to see how bad our leadership is. It's these coalitions. It's also early endorsements. So JD got in there early and started bringing in other people early.
Justice Democrats.
Justice Democrats. And so what that does is it helps you build the infrastructure earlier. And so a lot of money is coming into these races later because they'll get an endorsement from somebody, in the final 6 weeks, month. But then you have all this money and it's almost like too little too late at that point.
Yep. All right. Now, listen.
I'm listening.
I think know me, that I don't like to, I don't like this type of like schoolyard, juvenile bullying type of stuff that goes on. And I'm not like a gossipy type of chit chatter type of person. But I am trying to change and be more like that. And so in service of that, I present to you, as you know me, that, for quite some time, I have been dodged, or I should say Steven Crowder was dodging me. And I'm not suggesting that the whole coronavirus was his way of avoiding, getting into a debate with me, although it did sort of come up at a time where there was, very close to the peak pressure on him. He avoided me at Politicon about 2 years ago. He avoided an invitation from Politicon this year to debate me, wouldn't do it, was afraid. He was scheduled to go on that Gavin McInnes's or McInnes's or whatever, how they pronounce that guy's name, show. And McGinnis was going to give me $5,000, undoubtedly going to give Crowder at least $5,000 to sit down and, just even appear with me, wouldn't do it. Very, very nervous about it because supposedly, he's got 4 million subscribers, maybe 5 million on YouTube now. And we just have about 1 million or whatever, 850,000, somewhere around there. I don't know what it is. And so that was his excuse. Now, how public have I been about this? I mean, Matt, I know you guys were like saying like my comment. Did I want, you said, you asked me, Matt, did you want to share your point about Crowder? Matt, what was your point about Crowder? Or no, it was a while ago.
Oh, no. Yeah, it's nothing. Perhaps he may be worth some sympathy, but really no. Today he's out talking about how COVID deaths are inflated. So I think we should report the news as planned.
Well, okay. Yeah. And like, look, I've always had a theory about Crowder. Okay. And, and I'm not going to get too specific about the theory because, sometimes it's like it's not appropriate. But when I was told that he was backing out of the debate, Politicon, the first time around, in fact, we put out a video where you can hear the person tell me. I accidentally recorded the conversation. And I was told the reason why he got cold feet is what they said. That was the quote. He got cold feet. And the person who was telling me said, I think it's because his dad told him not to. And apparently his dad is a wrestling coach or former wrestling coach.
Oh, my God.
and is also his manager.
Oh.
Now,
Dadager.
look, I don't know if people have seen The Great Santini. This was a movie that was from back, I guess, in the 80s. And it was with, what's his face? Oh, gosh, I can't even remember. He's very famous. He was the Tom Hagen in all the good Godfather movie.
Robert Duvall.
Robert Duvall, right.
Robert Duvall.
Duvall. And Duvall was a very overbearing father and would really pick on his son. Now, I have a theory about Crowder, because one of the things that really marks Steven Crowder, I mean, if you were to just basically try and just sum up Crowder from afar, his big comedy shtick, and remember, this is a grown man.
Right.
In his, at least in his 20s, maybe he's in his 30s by now. His whole shtick is making fun of gay people. And it's very odd. I understand, okay, you're in junior high, you don't know any better, and you're feeling awkward about yourself or something, and because you don't have the emotional development, you take it out on on gay people. I don't approve of it, but it's in a juvenile, for somebody who maybe is raised by an overly machismo dad, and you're worried about, questions that you're having in mind when you're in junior high or something. But there's really no explanation for why a Steven Crowder would be so, as an adult, gay, you're making fun of gay people as your humor shtick. And it's very strange. I've always thought that'd be very, very strange. And I thought maybe this is a guy who, he works out a lot, and he's got big muscles. And it's almost like he's really trying to project that he's a man's man. And, anyways, so it was with that sort of understanding of Steven Crowder that I saw these tweets from the great Vic Berger last night. And apparently Vic Berger back in the day had a conversation with Greg Gutfield. It looks like a DM. And now listen, well, we'll get to this part, but apparently Vic Berger is talking out of school. He's revealing the contents of a private a conversation. But, to be honest, Greg Gutfield's not that great of a person either. And so this is reporting. I don't think Gutfield ever said this is off the record. So, that's what a good reporter does. You got to be careful when you talk to reporters, folks. So here's Vic Berger. And let's see some of these clips here. First, he says, there's still time for Crowder to grow up when he finally comes out and marries his personal trainer. I wonder what that was supposed to be about. Okay. I mean, Gutfield's a funny guy. There he goes. Maybe. And he wouldn't. He has issues. I met him at a bar once, said Gutfield. He sat Indian style on the floor in the middle of a crowded bar. And Vic Berger said, that's insane. He also, no joke, ordered milk. He's such a weirdo, said Vic Berger. Yeah, which would be cool if it wasn't him. He wants to be a star, and he hates everyone who took that risk, and he didn't. He calls himself a comedian, but doesn't perform. That's how the Schumer thing started. I would not let him call himself a comedian on my show. And Amy knew that. I hated him for saying he performs.
Oh, my gosh.
There's Gutfield. Yeah. And his musical thing was so painful, I wanted to cry for his family. Ha, 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 says Vic Berger. And he's in love with his body. He thinks he's got an issue with his sexuality, which is fine, says Gutfield. And then Vic Berger says, yeah, any chance he can get, he's shirtless or in drag, tight yoga pants. And Gutfield says, but it's so obvious to everyone but him, which is usually the truth. Yes, he's always like a Chippendale. And he was only at Fox News for 6 months. We all hated him. And he acts like he was a badass who left Fox News. None of us could stand him. This is really, I feel badly about this. I mean, it's a little bit sad. Of course, let's put up what Steven Crowder tweeted today so that we can get rid of some of our guilt for amplifying this. Let's take a look at this bad boy. Here we go. What is Stephen Crowder? I'm hanging out at the, here we go. Here he is. He's outside smoking a cigar because he's a man.
Yeah, exactly. He's
Real
not
men
wearing a
do that.
tight shirt, though. I'm a little surprised.
He's kicking back. The COVID death count is inflated. Change my mind.
He's using
There
a
he is.
chair.
Huh?
He's also using a chair, which is interesting.
Where is he?
Why is that interesting? He's using a chair.
Well, he's not sitting Indian style, as Gutfeld said.
Yeah, there we go.
Is that milk?
So there it is. So, I mean, good for him. And there it is, Stephen Crowder. And I got to, if anything, I feel.
More of the Crowder, though.
Huh?
There's another series of DMs about Crowder.
Oh, there is?
Yeah.
Which one is that?
About his.
Pop it up.
All right.
I mean, look, this is not like you're, this is just, here we go. Let's see. There's more to this. Okay, I think so. I had a weird chat with him before he got married, and it made me uncomfortable because I didn't know him well enough for that. This is Gutfield. This is back in 2017. He was asking me what I thought of the looks of his fiance. And Vic Berger said, "Ooh, not good." Yeah, that's weird, isn't it? That is a very weird thing. I don't know if I've ever experienced that. I've always found it really weird where like men have ever commented on my my ex-wife or my girlfriend or something like that. I just always found that like uncomfortable. Like what like that's a weird.
Well, don't they don't do that to other people? You don't ask each other. Women do that. They'll say, probably before you're dating, like, what do you think of this guy? Should I?
Well, no, there's
women are way worse about this than men, in my experience. Actually, women talk about men in pretty amazing ways, and I don't think
you're
guys
objects.
actually do.
You're just you're our toys,
I mean,
guys.
the idea of me saying to somebody like, "What do you think? Do you think my girlfriend is hot?" It's a weird thing to say. And then he says, "My God, how effed up is that? She is beautiful," but he couldn't judge. It was like he was shopping for a car and was asking a friend to take it for a test drive. I nodded and wondered how I got into this mess. Wow. Now, I wonder, do you think, here's the question. First off, I think that's really weird. I just think that, like, I don't know, like, if you're dating someone and you think that they're attractive, like, isn't that the relevant part? Not whether some strange guy who works with you is, I mean, I don't know, like.
I mean, to be fair, I have asked you and Matt at work, what you think of my partners.
Right.
And I asked
of course, we rate him. We rate him.
them.
We say, like honestly, like
that's what that wall was. I saw these women on the wall with like a scale of 1 to 10. I couldn't figure out what was going on over there.
Oh yeah, no, that's what we do.
The rating wall, right?
I mean, Brendan, how freaked out would you be if I came in, and we'll talk about the strange, but how freaked out if you would you? Like, how would you respond if I said, like, "Hey, do you think my new girlfriend is attractive?" If
this woman that I'm marrying, do you think she's attractive? The wedding is set.
I almost expect it to be like worse, like locker room talk, like Donald Trump talk. Like he's in that weird zone where men who were, I mean, I do know Greg Gutfeld, and I haven't had any like weird, creepy vibes from him. So I'll say, from what I can tell, he respects women that he works with. And then there's the zone of Donald Trump. So that in between is like a wannabe, like they think they watch Trump, somebody who's not comfortable in whatever his experiences in life. Maybe it's not sexuality. Maybe it's just his father is oppressive. Like you said,
right.
Going back to the original point. And it's their way of overcompensating because that's what the identity of masculinity is based on what his father, pushed him into. So seeing Trump and like the locker room talk, maybe that's his version.
I guess, but there's something. I mean, it's very possible. I think that's true. The thing I find about it, it's like it really is like. Do you like? And it's not just like you could extend the car analogy too as being like some type of like a penis surrogate. Like, I want to make sure that people know that I'm a virile guy. So is my girlfriend up to like? Do you think that she's like? Attractive enough to project that I'm like a guy, like a real, like a masculine guy or something. I don't know. It's a very weird thing, I think. Now, what do you guys think? I mean, is this, I mean, I feel a little bit bad for Gutfield, but I'm also sort of convinced that Gutfield was probably disappointed that Vic Berger didn't put this out earlier.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I think that's all very plausible.
Well, Vic did it because Gutfeld continues to propagandize for Trump. So he is getting at Gutfeld too, and I think that's what makes this even more beautiful in a way.
Well, the other thing that apparently Gutfield did was, I think Nomi, we're losing Nomi. I think the other thing that Gutfield did was he also sort of flipped on Mike Cernovich, and not in the good way. Put up this one.
1 second.
Vic Berger's really emptying out. There you are, Nomi. You're back.
Sorry.
That's all right. We're going to play now. Vic Berger also put up a little exchange he had about Cernovich with Gutfield. Now, this is in early 2017, so before Cernovich. And now I know Tom Shalhoub, and Tom Shalhoub is a comedian. He took over Red Eye. I don't know if that show's still going on.
No. They canceled it.
Oh, did they? He took over Red Eye. I remember when, I tried to get Tom Shalhoub on the show to always debate him, but he was always a little bit nervous about doing this. Is years ago. And I remember he was trying to get Red Eye, and I was like, well, good luck, man. And so Gutfield's talking about, I lost respect for Tom Shalhoub that night. I was actually in the green room doing O'Reilly and saw Cernovich mulling about but didn't recognize him. Then saw it the next day when Ben Kissel, who's a comedian on the show, told me. Everyone was livid. That was when they brought Cernovich on the program. I mean, it's interesting to me to see. Hold on. He makes Crowder look talented about Cernovich. Now, it's interesting to me, I got to say, that Gutfield has any standards whatsoever. I mean, he works on Fox. It's not like, Cernovich is an outlier there or Crowder's an outlier. I mean, they were hired there, or Cernovich wasn't hired there. But and Vic Berger makes the point of saying, just to show you how much Greg Gutfield is sold out, here he is telling me about the time Weird Mike Cernovich was led on Fox News. And then last night, this is what you get.
I have to say.
Hold on. He goes on, he promotes it. Show the other clip, Brendan. The other picture. Oh, did we lose Brendan? Oh, here it is. So here he is, Greg Gutfield. I'd like to highlight Brian Stelter's new book called Hoax. Here's a link I found to learn more about it. Best of luck to him. And it's actually the Mike Cernovich documentary.
What a worm.
Yeah, what a worm. I guess that's what you got to do.
I think this just he's illustrated it really well. I mean, my experiences, I did a lot of Fox News from 2012 to 27, probably right around that time, 2017. I used to be on the O'Reilly show once a week, and then Megyn Kelly twice a week. And so I had a lot of interactions with specifically Gutfeld and Tom Shalhoub. I used to do his show a couple times a week. And their shift from being libertarians who were, I would enjoy being on their shows more than, say, Bill O'Reilly, which felt like walking into a hostel. I mean, I felt like I was being taken hostage when I walked into his studio. So there's definitely they were the easier hosts to be around, but to see the shift, the drastic shift after Trump, which, it's like everybody in the industry. Everybody's trying to adapt to the clicks. Everybody's trying to adapt to the audience, what the audience wants. And it's self-preservation, I think. I mean, he's not anything near what he used to be when I would go on that show. I don't go on it at all anymore, but it went from being a libertarian, an anti-Trumper, to whatever this is, conspiratorial, dark web. I don't know.
Oh, we lost Nomi again.
I would imagine it has something to do with the wildfires going on around her.
I hope not. Let's go to the IMs. Well, let's take a phone call. Let's see here. Boop-a-doop-a-doo. Calling from a 347. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, is this me?
It is you. Who's this?
Hi, this is James from New York.
James from New York. What's on your mind?
Hi, I want to talk about a congressional congressional race that's happening in the Bronx that hasn't been getting as much attention, but is also one of the most important one of the most important races we've been seeing. This is the 15th congressional district. So the current Congressman Jose Serrano is retiring due to his bout of Parkinson's disease, and he's been repping the area for about 30 years, and he's actually considered one of the most progressive members of Congress. He brought Chavez to the Bronx. He was very outspoken on U.S. foreign policy. He made a deal with Venezuela to give people in the South Bronx low-cost heating oil. And since he's retiring, there's been a crowded primary to replace him. One of the likely people to replace him is a man by the name of Ruben Diaz Sr., who is in. Yeah.
Right. We were just talking about his son, who was sort of involved in the Elliot Engel imbroglio. But go ahead.
Yeah. His son is the Bronx Borough president. His father is in the city council. He's extremely conservative, anti-choice, anti-gay, and he actually has enough name ID in this race to plausibly win. There are a few other people in the race that could take who could take the race from him. There's Richie Torres, who is real. He's very much like a Pete Buttigieg figure. He doesn't really seem to have like a coherent ideology. He doesn't have like a worldview that he's really fighting for, and he's really the one who's raised the most money in this race. He's also raised a significant amount of that money for the real estate industry. So if he wins, he would likely be supportive of gentrifying a lot of the South Bronx, which has been occurring right now. And on the left, you have Samalis Lopez, who's backed by DSA, Our Revolution, Bernie Sanders, and
Matriarch, the first endorsers.
Yep.
Sorry, we're very involved in that race.
By Matriarch.
Yep.
Yeah.
I interviewed Samalis too on Ring of Fire. She's a great candidate.
Yeah. So it's likely that this is one of those three people is going to win this race, and this is a race we really got to pay attention to, because you could have an extremely right-wing Democrat who could be representing one of the literally the bluest district in the country, and that would really be a nightmare scenario for the progressive movement. That's why I'm helping Samalis Lopez and everything I can to help make sure she wins this race, and I encourage everyone else to do that as well.
All right, let me ask you both a question. The polling showed that Torres was in the best position to knock him off, knock Diaz off. There was a push to get people to rally around Torres for that reason. It's sort of like a break the glass type of moment. Sanders came in and endorsed, right? Samalis shortly after that is my understanding. Is that right? Do I have that right, Nomi?
Yeah. I don't know when it started, but I think it's pseudo, because you still have Michael Blake in the race, and I think the reason why so many people are staying in it, Melissa Mark Viverito, you have it's a crowded field with a lot of people in it that have name ID, but it's a race that's so hard to measure. There's no real accurate data. So I don't think anybody's going to coalesce around one candidate. I just want to correct one point about Richie Torres. He's not like Pete Buttigieg. We can criticize Richie Torres, but we have to be really honest with ourselves too. Like, I'm clearly backing Samalis. I love Samalis. Richie does have a lot of real estate backing, but he has been previously backed by the WFP, and he previously endorsed Bernie Sanders, and he was more progressive up until now. So, just let's keep things in, the reality zone here, because campaigns like to reinvent
what do you
folks.
do? What do progressives do in this moment? I mean,
support Samalis.
Okay.
I mean, it's just, you don't know. The polling is crap. The only polling I saw was Sean McElwee's polling, which, it's new. So that there's a lot to be said about that.
Their polling, to be fair, though, Data for Progress has been pretty accurate on most of its polling.
But right now, in a race where it's been pretty accurate, but it's new. And so when you haven't done a lot of polling in New York City, and there's very little evidence to work off of. And there's never been a race like this in the middle of COVID. This is the highest concentration of Democrats in the country, but it is the lowest turnout. So it's really, in a normal year, it was anybody's game to turn out votes. But the problem is, and this is why we'll keep coming back to the point, you've got to endorse early. Somalis is raising more money now, but we're 7 days before the election right now. Right. And so if she had that money come in the first 6 months, or hell, even 3 months ago, I think we would be having a very different conversation about this polling. But you also have someone like Michael Blake. Michael Blake has raised a lot of money. He's the assembly member from that district. Someone gave me this advice one time. They said, when they see a name that they know on a ballot, don't underestimate that, which is why we as a movement have to work harder. And that's why I say you have to support Somalis.
Why is this money coming in so late? Like,
because they're getting endorsed late.
Huh?
Because progressives are getting endorsed late.
Why? Why isn't somebody on that?
Because our progressive leaders need better political directors, frankly. I mean, there's no reason. I'm sorry. Bernie, get in early. Elizabeth Warren, get in early. Like, I have nothing to lose criticizing you're not running for office right now. Get in early. It means nothing when these people get $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a week before their election. Do it early. You have nothing to lose. You're not running for president anymore. Case closed. It's frustrating.
Boom.
And the poll you were talking about, there were actually some methodological issues of that poll. Like the South Bronx is it's the poorest congressional district in the country, so there's actually a pretty large digital divide. So about 29% of people either have no internet or only dial-up. So in that poll, it's an internet-only poll. So you're actually can't sample about 30% of the possible electorate in that race. So there's so that methodology they're using for this race, which may be more applicable in like the 16th, 14th, or other congressional districts. I'm skeptical of how well that can be used in the South Bronx specifically.
All right. Well, I guess we'll see. But folks, Somalis is a great candidate. So if you're in that district,
I will go as far to say she's a once in a lifetime candidate. She grew up homeless. I've known her for many years. She's a once in a lifetime candidate.
James, thanks for the call.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
Good call.
Very good. I'm glad he brought that up.
Me too. All right. Let's take one more phone call. And let's see what we got here. Calling from a 201 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Oh.
Hello? 201.
Me?
Yeah?
Hi, this is a Subaru driver from Pennsylvania.
Subaru driver from Pennsylvania. Well, welcome here. You're speaking to a Subaru driver.
Hell yeah. All right. So, first of all, can I get a shofar? Because I got a PhD from Prager University. Pretty proud of that.
You got a PhD from Prager, and you want a shofar for that?
That was a joke, and it was pretty lame. But anyway, speaking of, are you familiar? I know that you've discussed like the Ben Shapiro stuff recently. Are you aware that he wrote a book called "Porn Generation: How Social Liberalism is Corrupting Our Future"?
What?
No, I didn't. When did he write that?
Yeah. It appears from 2005. I'm on Goodreads. After like all this discussion about like books that he's written, like I went and just to check out some of the titles, and I was shocked to see that. I'm not going to read it obviously because it's just insane. But like, if somebody wants to read it and give some book notes, that would be great.
All right. Well, yeah, nice.
Ben's been grifting.
Okay.
Yeah, Ben's been grifting the publishing
so
angle for a while.
My not so serious question, but maybe a good to close the show on. You basically covered like a few weeks ago Diamond and Silk, and how they were like kicked off of whatever platform they were on by their producers because I guess they're not popular or whatnot. My question for you is: do you think there's people out there that are legitimately going to Diamond Silk as like their go-to source for news, and like that's how they like get news for like how the world is through Diamond and Silk?
I think that there are not people who go, I mean, there may be a couple, but I think broadly speaking, it's not people who go to Diamond and Silk for their exclusive source for news, but it does like round out some of the edges and reinforce some narratives. I mean, look, they are all very, to a large extent, very much on the same page, because that's the way that their ecosystem and that's the way that they're sort of like their business model runs. Like they're all on the same page. And so it's really more about like, wow, I can't, even Diamond and Silk agree with this. And so doesn't, Ben Shapiro, and so doesn't Beck. I mean, they're more or less on the same page. Occasionally they're slightly off, but I think that's what it is. I think it's more reinforcing than it is, exclusive. What do you think, Nomi? I appreciate the call. What do you think, Nomi?
I think you're right. I think there's a propaganda ecosystem, and it was really fostered at Fox News under Ailes when he would send out his daily memo, and all the shows would stay on message more or less and use the same language, like, Obama's a Kenyan or the birther stuff, and Barack Hussein Obama. I mean, all those things were messages that were pushed out from the top, and then, and that goes through the Heritage Foundation to all these little like online publications, and now this online world of all the conservative hosts. So, whether or not they need a memo or not, they just repeat it because they're very loyal to their values and their beliefs.
And it's also easier.
Yeah.
I mean,
totally.
Listen, I know I have very strong reason to believe, let's put it this way, that a guy like, say, Tim Pool, okay, not necessarily identified as a right winger, although he's like pro-Trump, just because the left left him. That the reason why he does what he does is because it's easy and he's making a ton of cash. That he literally, the words like this have come out of his mouth. I only have to read like one article and then I can just have an opinion on it and that's it. I don't have to know anything.
Right.
And he's a businessman and he doesn't care. Mm-hmm. All right. 5 IMs and then we're out of here. Meanwhile, in New Mexico, in Albuquerque, people are attempting to remove a statue of Juan Onate, a white supremacist from a terrorist group called the New Mexico Civil Guard, shot one of the people involved. Onate not only killed many Native Americans, he ordered that the right foot from all adult male survivors of the Acoma Pueblo to be cut off. Even the Spanish crown was appalled enough to punish him. Imagine having statues of someone this evil and sadistic still standing, or schools named Onate. That's nuts. It's nuts.
Oh, my God.
You put that statue in a corner of a museum and you talk about, like, you use it as an opportunity to talk about how disinformation is taught.
Yeah.
I mean, I've used this example before, but like, the power of these things. It's nuts.
Oh, my God. It's a stupid thing.
I was in Cuba in 2000 and maybe 2. It was after 9/11. I think it was like, sometime in 2002, I guess. Maybe late 2001. And I was just very, particularly when I got back to the States, as to like, what was propaganda, because there's a lot of like in Cuba, I don't know if it's the same now. This is 20 years ago almost now, but there's no advertising. There's no billboards. All the billboards are actually just government messages. And not too heavy-handed, but there was a statue near the U.S. I think Intersect they call it. It was not really the embassy. They didn't officially have an embassy. It was sort of just like a non-official embassy, I guess. And it was about, I don't know, 500 yards, maybe a half a mile away from it. Near the Malecón, which is like the big, it's the ocean and a big wall. It's alongside it, and like a boardwalk almost. And there was a statue of Jose Marti, who was sort of like the functional equivalent of like the founding father of Cuba. Obviously lived over 100 years ago now. And it was the base of the statue was in cement, and it was actually degraded. You could actually see like big there were rocks in it, and it worn, and it was, it looked like it was all copper, but it was now all green. And Marti is holding up his hand like this, facing towards the U.S. intersect, I think it was, or whatever, the embassy. And in his hands is a child, like he's protecting the youth of Cuba from the U.S.
Wow.
And that child, oh shoot, now I've forgotten his name.
Elian Gonzalez.
The kid that the Clinton administration was trying to hold back. God, I can't remember his
Elian
name.
Gonzalez. I just made a joke about that, and it was actually
Elian
him.
Gonzalez. It was Elian Gonzalez.
What?
And it was it. You see what the purpose of statues are.
Yeah.
It collapsed time and space to create this thing. But also, if you looked at the statue quickly, you just thought like, oh, this has been here for 8 years. And in fact, no. I mean, in 2000, it had been there for maybe a couple of years.
Yeah.
And so the power of these statues, I think, can't be underestimated. And it's not about history. It's about memorializing. And it's about making a statement and making everyone believe and accept a version of history that is actually not to be questioned. That it doesn't raise any questions.
It's what the Marxist historian calls invented tradition.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so that's why these things need to be, if you want to protect history, actual history, you need to put these things in a context where you are inviting the individual or the citizen to examine them, not to just pass by them and accept it as part of the landscape.
But what's frustrating to me about this is most of these statues that we say are our history are not actually from that moment. They're afterwards. They are put up to reinvent the history of the recent past. It's propaganda.
When most of these statues, Confederate statues, went up, when you had a massive resurgence of the KKK in this country.
Yep.
I heard an interview with Doug Jones last night, I had never heard this before, but there are monuments to the Confederacy in 31 states in the country, and there were 11 states in the Confederacy.
Wow.
Yep.
George Floyd's uncle, I believe, is a hotel owner in South Dakota, and he is working to get the sheriff's department, I believe, to remove the Confederate flag from their sheriff's badge.
Yep.
What?
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
Social Jewish warrior. LOL, the Congressional Black Caucus endorsed Engel. Indeed. Nuts.
Against Jamal Bowman.
Yep. Pansy
Beautiful.
Pelosi. Sam, Nomiki is wonderful, but her stories about Phoenix right now are just material evidence that we need to depopulate Arizona. No one whose ancestors didn't live there in 1491 need to live there anymore. Defund police, depopulate the Phoenix metro area.
Well, can I just add one thing? And I hear you. You know, much of this country before 1491 is we're all, sitting on it. This was the first established city. It was not in America at the time. It was the first established. Tucson was the first established city in the United States. So it's actually been occupied for a very long time. It's pretty fascinating.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Cat loving commie. Hello, MR Crew. I just want to share a tale from the Boston City Council. Obviously, the nature of policing has been at the center of recent discussions, and yet only grants being pushed through are those multi-million-dollar checks for the police department. Even in a city with a world-renowned medical care and ongoing medical research, politicians are still leaving to police to maintain safety and order during this COVID crisis. Meanwhile, it's up to citizens like us to take care of our neighbors who can't get food, childcare, supplies, legal representation, etc. Silver lining, however, is that various organizations have begun to bring messages of class consciousness to protesters and in media interviews. Maybe this is one of those weeks where, as Lenin would say, decades happen. Solidarity. Mm-hmm. One gets that sense. Garrett from Denver, before anyone else. Bay. It's not Bo. It's pronounced Bay. Love you, Sam. You're not Bay. Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that. Ryan Coyle, mass at the Trump rally, 2% if you don't count Klan hoods.
Oof.
Nice.
Whoa.
Colin from Nebraska. Sam, thanks for reading my I am yesterday by my family. Give me shit for wearing the mask at a large gathering, which, FYI, the CDC released the strongly recommended wearing a mask in large crowds message a half hour before the wedding. Just wanted to let you know I'll be getting tested Saturday. Thank God. It only took 3 months. Oy. Wow. CBD Jazz cigarettes mask use here in Utah appears to be very low, even as Gary Herbert urges the public to wear them. Last night I spoke with a friend who is a nurse. Shared his surprise about how little even those in the medical community seem to care about wearing masks, social distancing. Just find it interesting. The only way anyone seems to care about wearing a mask is if it's required by their employer. Best of luck, Nomi, as they say, out of the frying pan into the other frying pan. And the final I am of the day. Bob Flav, maybe Jim Adore had it right all along. We needed someone like Trump to show us how effing stupid the American people are. Go to his rallies, get infected, and die. Good riddance, I should say. I shall stay in and drink my scotch. Thank you. Well, I don't hope anybody dies there. And I frankly hope no one gets infected. But I also hope I have wings. And that's not going to happen either. Nomi, always a pleasure. Folks, check out Nomi's show. What do you got? What do you remind people what you got this week?
We have the one and only Cori Bush, who, man, she blew me away. Lauren Ashcraft, who's running against Carol Maloney in New York. Another district, another race you should check out. Make sure to send your love to these congressional challengers who are running in other races because, you know, like I said, you got to spread that love around because they're working very, very hard and have been for the last year. And then Jennifer Cohn talks about our horrible voting system and these machines that are just voter suppression, frankly.
There you go. What's the name? What do you call that thing that where someone's running against somebody who's an incumbent?
A challenger?
Oh, I heard your Buffalo came out pretty big on that.
What did I say?
Challenger.
Oh no!
Yeah, you did.
Every once in a while.
There you go.
Oh no!
All right, folks. See you tomorrow. Challenger.
Take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the lie bar, but finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in.